great pleasure to welcome this awesome team of panelists. We'll start off with Julia. Julia, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julia Clark. I am a senior geotechnical manager with Robert Kistner. I am located in Houston, Texas. A majority of the projects that I manage are transportation related, and they're funded by either the Texas Department of Transportation or other government entities. Some of my work involves structures such as bridges, MSC retaining walls, and the foundation elements that support those, as well as with roads. I am currently the president of the American Society of Civil Engineers, the Houston branch. I've been very active in that organization for the last 6 years, and I've been a member of ASCE for 17 years, ever since I was a collegiate student at the University of South Florida.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Julia.
You're welcome.
I'll turn to Guillermo next. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. So my name is Guillermo Diaz. I am a senior technical principal in disaster risk resilience in WSP USA. I live in New York City, and I'm originally from the Dominican Republic, where I was born, raised, and had a great 20-something years before coming to the US. Here at WSP, I work in the Geotechnical and Tunneling Technical Excellence Center, where I have the opportunity to work with a great team of local New Yorkers and also other staff across the country and even internationally on infrastructure projects and also building projects. Mostly my work is on disaster risk reduction and resilience building. In extracurricular activities, I have been with ASE for not as many years as Julia, but quite a few. With the local metropolitan section, I have chaired a diversity and inclusion committee that was founded in 2017. I chaired a few technical groups, and in a national level, I am right now one of the executive members of Mosaic, which is the equivalent of diversity and inclusion for ASE National. I am also involved in technical committees for the Geo Institute. And outside of ASC, I'm involved in other professional societies, but I would say my favorite is Quake, the Queer Advocacy Knowledge and Knowledge Exchange, which is a nonprofit for LGBTQIA plus professionals and students pursuing careers in the built environment. Thank you for having me here.
No, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to hear your perspectives today. Luisa, I'll turn to you next. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Luisa Duke. I'm a bridge engineer working in Boulder, Colorado. I work for Foothills Bridge, which is a construction and dismantling of bridges company. It's a really niche field of engineering, which I'm really excited to be working on for the past few months, actually. I'm originally from Colombia. I came to the US for my undergrad, where I played tennis at South Dakota State University. And since then, I've been involved with Engineers Without Borders, for the most part, in projects in Bolivia, Guatemala, Puerto Rico, South Dakota, and now in Colorado as well. So helping a lot of communities with limited resources, kind of getting access to clean water and just helping them through different problems. With ASCE, I have been involved for just a couple of years with the Denver Young Members Group, where I'm going to be serving as the vice president for the upcoming year. And at the national level, just mentoring, and I've been a topic moderator in the past for the Career by Design Forum and just different activities. And I'm also very heavily involved with the Structural Engineering Institute of ASE, where I'm part of a couple of committees, the Business Practice Committee, as well as the Global Activities Division, where I work closely with the ASE chapter in Colombia. So I just like to be involved in different activities and just all around like global communities and just be really involved in kind of the different societies.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Luis. Laurie, I'll turn to you next.
Sure, thank you. I'm Laurie Matkowski. I am the Director of Connected and Automated Vehicle Services for Gannett Fleming. I've been with the company for about 2.5 years now. Prior to that, I was in the public sector for almost 20 years at a metropolitan planning organization. So working mostly on planning for technology and the planning process and all of that good stuff, and bringing that into my current career with connected and automated vehicles. Most of my projects are involved with preparing the nation's infrastructure, state infrastructure on automated vehicle deployment and how that can interact. So with ASCE, I was involved since my college days at Clemson University, and I just volunteer whenever I can to speak at panels such as this. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for taking time out of your day today. Dani, your turn.
Hi, all. Hi, my name is Dani Schroeder, and I am a structural engineer in Panone's Transportation Division, where I focus primarily on reconstruction and rehabilitation of bridges and other transportation-related structures. For ASCE, I have many hats, and I've been involved with ASCE since my freshman year at Drexel. Most recently, I was the past K-12 outreach co-chair for the Philadelphia Younger Member Forum. I'm a part of several SCI committees, and I am also a corresponding member of Mosaic, which is the committee that Guillermo mentioned. Also in the DEI space, I serve as a senator for the Society of Women Engineers and have spent the last year as part of that group. I'm part of the D&I Gender Inclusion Subteam, and as part of that team, we spent the last year or so researching and discussing this topic, doing several focus groups, all of that kind of part of it. And this past month, we just provided strategic recommendations to the rest of the Sweet Senate about how we can be more inclusive moving forward for underrepresented genders within the society. Thank you all. Thank you especially to ASCE for inviting me to take part in this panel alongside this powerhouse of panelists, and I look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dani, for joining us. I know you, Louise, everyone on this call is, crazy busy. I don't know how any of you get any sleep, quite frankly. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about the work that you all are doing. So I'll go ahead and start with the kickoff question. Before I start off with the kickoff question, though, I should say, because we have such an awesome team of panelists, I want to encourage everyone to take advantage of their expertise and ask questions in the chat box. I'm sure they'd love to hear and answer and engage with you today, so please go ahead and ask questions in the chat box. But we'll start off with the kickoff question. How can civil engineers become more deliberately inclusive in their daily interactions? So I'll go ahead and start with Julia first.
So the panelists, when they introduced themselves, most of them, they talked about being involved in different organizations or in different parts of society. I believe that civil engineers, we shouldn't close ourselves off in a singular silo. We need to be active in other groups in order to get different perspectives. I can speak for myself as a younger engineer. When I started out, I said I had 17 years. I started off with ASCE, but I got involved in SWE, I got involved in NSBE, I'm a member of Toastmasters. So the more you get involved in different groups, you're exposed to different people with different perspectives, different backgrounds. But the one thing is, you don't just immerse yourself in the group. You have to be around people that you have like-minded interests. But there's other aspects to why they're different than you. And I think that's the way how, as civil engineers, we're going to be able to expose ourselves to a different perspective, because if you're in just this one silo, you're going to be missing out on what the world has to offer and how different the world is, and making sure that you understand other people's views as well. I think that's what we should be telling younger civil engineers as they come up, is that, look, you're a civil engineer, but you need to open yourself up to other things outside of that.
Absolutely, thank you. Guillermo, can you share some of the ideas you have about being more inclusive in your daily life?
Sure, thank you so much. I actually, I enjoy so much what Julia said, because civil engineers are engineers that serve people. So I think the most important thing is to think of everyone around us, people, and trying to always bring ourselves in a professional way to our every interactions every day. Because of the nature of the work, we end up working with different teams. So we have to learn to be team players. We have to have this opportunity of being in a team and use it as a learning exercise so that we can listen and we can also have the opportunity to talk and voice those things that are of our concern. It's a good opportunity as well for us to check our biases. Everyone already has, inherited biases. And I think Julia said something very interesting as well, which is that we have to stop ourselves from being only in one little box. We are intersectional individuals. The fact that I'm a cisgender gay male is gonna be a different experience for someone who perhaps is a transgender woman. So it really comes up to the individuality and the complexity of us as people, and seeing how we can integrate this into a productive conversation that would allow inclusion, diversity, and equity to be players so that we can attain social justice.
Absolutely. Luis, I'll turn to you next.
Yeah, so basically, again, kind of saying what Julie and Guillermo said, just being citizens of the world, just getting to know other cultures and getting to know other people and understanding that the more you listen and the more you understand the other person's perspective, the more understanding you're going to have of how you can help them. And I think I keep coming back to that when I work with Engineers Without Borders, travel to all these communities in different countries where English is not the first language. They don't really understand how different we live here in the US, or for the matter of fact, in just bigger cities in their own countries, just because they're so poor, they live just basically with the basic needs, and we're coming there trying to impose our beliefs and our systems to them. So just come back to the analogy, just we go to those communities to listen, to understand, to provide for them before we kind of impose our own views and our own perspectives on them. So again, listen more than you talk, and just understand where they're coming from. Because again, you look at this panel, we all come from different backgrounds. We all have things that we have to share with each other. And the way I approach different conversations at work and with organizations and such is, even though I know quite a bit about engineering, I mean, that's what I do every single day, there's still a lot that I don't know about engineering, about the other person I'm talking to. So I'm coming to those conversations knowing that they can provide something you don't know, or give you that little bit of piece of knowledge that you don't know that will complement what you know right now. It's going to be really important and help you understand where they're coming from.
Absolutely. I think everyone so far has mentioned listening. It's so important. Laurie, I'll turn to you.
Sure. So listen more and ask questions. Ask a lot of questions. Ask questions, listen more. That's one of my top bullets that I've been jotting down as the three of you spoke already. And in my world, it's so heavily dependent on technology for the CAV world that we really need to make sure that we keep the human aspect involved. And with the human aspect, there's the diversity and inclusion. So, when I work on projects and we're constantly talking about the technology and how is it going to be impacting society, we have to really think about what that means. And is it going to have a positive benefit on all of society, all users, and all communities? So just keep that in mind as your projects are going. And, you may not have the type of project that you think you can influence, but you can. And you can think about how this is going to trickle down the bigger project and how you are involved in that. And just keep thinking about all users, all communities. I think is really important.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dani, I'll turn to you next. What are some of your ideas about everyday life?
Sure. So kind of building off some of the previous answers, civil engineering is a people's profession, or a profession about the people. So one thing that I do to try to be more inclusive is going out of my way to engage with people of different levels and different backgrounds than me. Back in the day when we were in the office, there was a toaster oven in the kitchen. And so what I would do is I would bring in bagels that I would heat up in the morning. And it takes a little while for you to heat up your bagel. So you're sitting there, and by intentionally having myself in the kitchen, I would run into various people that were either putting their lunchbox in the refrigerator, or filling up their cup of coffee, or filling up their water bottle. And through that, I got to meet a lot of different people that I wouldn't usually interact with on a daily basis in my cubicle across the way. I got to talk to people, including like our director of strategic growth, to a Drexel co-op that's in the marketing department, that there are some similarities that we have, but at a face value, you wouldn't really know that. So kind of doing that. Now with COVID-19, there's no natural water cooler, or in my case, I'm calling it a bagel breakfast opportunity. So my advice is to just be intentional with your actions. So another example is we had a new hire start during this pandemic. So I sent a quick message to her to just welcome her and say, let me know if you have any questions. So taking that quick action, it led to some more discussion of, she was like, a couple days later, like, hey, I'm trying to find this thing on the portal. Can you help me? So like that quick little message that I sent before started like a further conversation. So like even just little quick messages now, while we're all virtual, can go a long way.
Can we add more to the conversation, Teresa?
Yeah, go for it. And I think I know where you're going, but go for it.
No, it's okay. I'm just adding that if your company has an employee resource group, that's an excellent way to connect with a lot of different backgrounds of people. So as much as it's important to connect with those outside, external, it's also important to connect inside, and especially now, and take advantage of mentoring programs. Mentoring programs often match people of different backgrounds, age-wise, naturally, because mentor-mentee, but just because of sheer experience in the industry. But that's a great way to incorporate and listen to others of different background. And I've learned so much from my mentee, more than probably she has learned from me. But and it's a great way to connect with other people of different backgrounds.
Yeah, and especially during the pandemic, right?
Especially during the pandemic. In fact, our formal mentoring program started before the pandemic, right before the pandemic. And right when the pandemic started, I was so busy with my projects that it was kind of dropped the ball a little bit on it. And I connected with my mentee and I said, we have to get back on track. Let's meet like every week. We agreed that was good. And so we're having more connections versus less. And that's transcended a ton because it was really her first time in working from home consistently. So and part of my job, a lot of my job was working from home because I traveled a lot. So we shared lessons learned I shared my lessons learned. So we're communicating more than less.
Yeah. Absolutely. So there's a great question in the chat box. I'm really excited to hear what you all have to say. The question is, approximately 40% of women leave engineering mid-career or don't become an engineer after school. Studies show this issue to workplace culture. How do we convince engineering organizations to change to be more inclusive to women? So, Julia, can I go ahead and turn to you first? Do you have any thoughts?
Okay, well, I can speak with regarding to that question. Hopefully I'm able to answer it appropriately. I feel that throughout the past few years, we've been doing better with women actually staying in engineering and being involved in engineering than probably in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So I want everybody to be aware that we have, we've moved the needle in the right direction, but we're not all the way there yet. So I just want everybody to be aware of that it's been a work in progress. One thing that I've realized, and I can only speak about my experience, is For me, it's more of me as the individual, being involved in support groups to help me along the way of that. Not all of the companies or the different employees you may have, they may not be in that right space right now of saying, hey, this is what we want to do. And probably that shouldn't be the organization you're with in the first place. But let's just say that that is the organization that you're with, that they're not there yet in noticing or wanting to move in that needle. Getting involved in an organization like the Society of Women Engineers, Danielle mentioned that. I was an active member of that as well, and finding those resources to help young girls to get scholarships to move them along the way in their careers. And they have different tools within those organizations, either it's early career, mid-career, or late career, to support women if they're not getting it from their employers. Of course, the employers, it would be nice if they do have that. I know for me with Robert Kistner, my employer supports it a lot with wanting to move women into leadership roles, but not just move them there just to move them there just to have a number, but actually willingly train them to be the leaders that that they want to be, to mold that organization, to show that image, because women have a lot to offer. And so that's from my perspective of, either if you're not getting it from your organization, find other resources like the Society of Women Engineers, other organizations that can do that, or you may not be in the right organization to foster what you need. There's other organizations out there. With my former employer, I got what I needed to a certain extent, but I didn't get all that I needed until I moved to, go to another employer, and I saw the difference in the support that they gave. And so not all organizations are going to be willing to do a lot of that investment. It might be women, it might be, people of color. It's not just, it's everyone who is considered in that diverse group category. That some employers, they're not there yet. And what are you going to do? Are you going to sit and wait for them, or are you going to go somewhere else to either another employer or find another resource on your own to get you there and to give you what you need?
Absolutely. So Guillermo, I know you have your hand up. I know Laura, you have some thoughts on this too, I'm sure. Guillermo, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I think Julia said a lot in those last statements. I think underrepresented groups tend to suffer a lot in the same way. So I see the question, it talks about women, and actually there is a very interesting study, a survey that was conducted by SE3, which is Structural Engineer Engagement and Equity Initiative. They have a survey from 2016, I think 2018, they're right now doing another survey where they talk about this same issue, about the difference in pay gap between men and women. They talk about other issues like retainment. So I invite you to look for it, SE3 project. But regards to how can organizations be more inclusive, I think that the first thing is that once someone is looking for a job, for an opportunity, it's very important to try to understand the culture and try to, even if there's a letterhead, try to look at the letterhead and see how diverse is the letterhead. The generic rule that I have experienced myself is that when you see diversity in the leadership, there will be better practices and more opportunities for everyone in all levels. It just happens that sometimes, companies are very small or very large, and you may not be able to see it firsthand as simple as in a letterhead. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that you try, whenever you look for a job or even go to a graduate school or college, that you try to understand how diverse is the opportunity, so that you can see if this fits you well or not. Because again, this goes back to something I said earlier about biases. I think we all have our own biases, and we're going to be uncomfortable in certain environments. So we all have to also be ready to adapt ourselves this new place that we're going, or the place that we're at, and try to find support with mentorship. Laurie mentioned that. I think it's so important to find mentorship support. Myself, one of my greatest mentors is a woman that has experienced a lot of challenges, that actually I was able to translate into my own personal aspects. So that helped me a lot. And I think this is a good way to help yourself to fit into this kind of organizations.
Absolutely. Laura, I know there's been a lot of thoughts. Do you have anything to add?
Well, one concrete thing that I could add is that take all names off of any resumes that you may get. Just take them off. Just if your HR department says, I'm going to give you a stack of resumes, say, give them to me with no names. That's one thing that we could definitely do. I like what Guillermo was saying about the unconscious bias, especially in the time right now of this pandemic, because you're often quick to make decisions that you're not seeing somebody face to face. So actually our company has employed 2 different programs that all employees have to take on unconscious bias that was implemented after the pandemic. Now, it may have been in the works for a while, but especially now during the pandemic, where you're unconscious bias and you're quick making decisions without thinking, you really need to think about that now, especially under the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Dani, Louise, did you have anything to add before we move on?
Sure, I can add one quick thing that sparked that I thought of when Laurie was talking. Our company has talked about the possibility of when we go back to the office. And as we start those discussions, it's important to remember that everyone has different experiences. Personally, my partner's in healthcare, so I have a different experience. There's also people that have young kids at home that daycares are either starting to open up or not opening up. So everyone has these personal experiences and lived experiences that we need to keep in mind when we're moving forward and we're talking about that moving back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question in the chat box is, do you believe that the Black Lives Matter movement will affect the engineering world and more specifically the transportation industry? Laura, I know you work in transportation quite a bit. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one that there's not a lot of answers to right now because it's really evolving, right? In the short term, there's a lot of the protests going on, and that affects transportation in the short term, but that affects communities and how their mobility is. And so because a lot of, I live near Philadelphia, I'm right outside Philadelphia, and that has impacted every weekend, transportation being shut down in terms of roadways. So it's more agility into how to adapt to the protests that are going on, especially, with that particular movement. But I mean, it really can be a good example of how to, be more agile to the process and make sure that people are getting to where they need to be despite a protest, perhaps. If a transit system is shut down or if certain roads are shut down and people can't get to their jobs, that's a big problem. But that's the way I see it right now, just looking at that question and thinking right off the bat, just those near term impacts. But I'd love to hear other perspectives.
Absolutely. Julia, you look like you have some thoughts to share.
I was thinking of a response for the question. I know that Laurie took it into the aspect of the transportation facilities. I was thinking the question was more talking about, the institution of transportation. Like what I said before, most of my projects are funded, through the Texas Department of Transportation, which is a government entity, and they provide different transportation facilities within Texas. And I do agree with what Laurie said. I mean, the Black Lives, Matter, that movement it's relatively new, and we're not sure how it's going to, is it going to be short term, long term? What are the effects are going to be? But I can see in transportation right now, I started to see the leadership is changing a little bit with that particular entity, where it was traditionally male Caucasian who were actually at the tier. And then within a recent few years, I saw the Texas Commission, who gives funding throughout the state and to that government entity. I start to see that they start to have women at the helm. I haven't seen, I think they may have a person of color that's represented there. And also, when I take a look at, like, say, for example, the airport systems, I start to see that they had, I think at one point they had a board for, I think this is the Houston airport systems. I start to see a lot of variety and diversity with people of color, different genders, different ages. They're represented so that they have a voice in, transportation and the funding. And so that I saw that question as more of the leadership institution on transportation and how the Black Lives Matter movement is affecting that. I started to see that more before the movement started, and I think it's because I live in Houston, where it's inherently diverse. You have all different nationalities, all different backgrounds, so there's no excuse to say we can't have a diverse board, of transportation professionals representing the Houston airport system, or representing TxDOT, or representing whatever entities are here. So for me, I saw that the change was happening. I don't know how it's going to affect for Texas, how it's going to affect it more than it already has before this.
And I would like to add that it allows more of the conversation for that leadership. It makes it okay to talk more and more. And I've noticed that in my projects, I've noticed that just within my company, that it brings it to the forefront, which is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a thing, is it's really starting conversations that are long overdue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, again, I want to encourage everyone to please share any questions that you may have in the chat box, but I'll go on to our next question, which is kind of interlinked, but reflecting on the last 4 months, how has your organization's DEI work shifted in terms of employee engagement? How has it affected interactions with colleagues? So again, very, very related as far as continuing the conversation. But again, how have you personally dealt with it? Julia, I'll go ahead and turn to you next.
So I mentioned before that my employer is Robert Kistner. It's a mid-sized company, close to 500 employees. And I'll just go into a little anecdotal story before I continue. In 2019, the president and CEO, Chris Schultz, and I and a couple of other employees, we attended the WTS Women Transportation Seminar. They had a diversity luncheon. And we sat at the luncheon and it talked about the different women's and different leadership. I mentioned about the airport systems. I mentioned there was a general manager who is running Hobby Airport, and she was an African-American woman, and they were talking about different issues. And he was taking, a lot of notes, and he was like, we really need to see what we can do in our company, because before, when I joined my company 2 years ago, when I saw the leadership, it was just, sorry to say this, but old middle-aged Caucasian men. Nice men. They were not nice men, though. That's the exec team. But we have an operational leadership as well. And someone brought it to their attention and said, on the website, you just have you guys there, but what about the operational leaders? There's diversity there. And so they rebranded the website so you can see the diversity. We're not there yet with getting diverse groups up into the executive leadership team, but they're moving in that direction. One thing that my company is doing right now is, because our leadership team saw the need that, look, we're going to retire off, but before we retire off, we want our company to look like the world, like a diverse community. And they've actually put funding aside to set up a diversity and inclusion program to get it started. So this started before COVID-19. They've been working on it. I've even volunteered to be a part of the task force or to be in those conversations. And we were getting things, they're setting things up in August. I think it probably may have been a little bit earlier, but because of all the COVID-19, we had to just readjust different things. So we've started it. At least we're one of the companies that we saw the need and we're making the investment, and we want to move in that direction. We don't want to be left behind, because if companies don't change, you're going to be left behind. You're on mute.
I knew I was going to do that at least once today. I mean, I got 37 minutes in, so I'm kind of impressed. Laurie, what are your thoughts on that topic?
So I did already mention my company's, the unconscious bias requirement that the company has pushed for us all to take, which is excellent, especially during this time. In addition to our diversity and inclusion group that we have already, we have other employee resources group, a young persons group, a military veterans, a connected women group. And during this time, in June, we just started a new ERG of LGBTQ. So it's really making sure that even in this time that we're connected. So that's really that employee engagement. And I talked about the mentoring program. So which I really believe strongly about within a company, in any company. And just we're having a lot of happy hours, I guess, in the virtual happy hours, and in all throughout the company, in different combinations of people and different combinations of backgrounds in terms of what do you work on? Are you in construction? Are you in transportation? Are you in, kind of blending them, or science or water business line, different business lines, and kind of throwing them all together in ad hoc virtual happy hours. So that's been kind of nice, actually, because I've actually met people online and through the web that I've never seen in person. So it's more that connecting everybody.
Yeah, no, that's great. Getting different perspectives and learning from others. And, that's been a great part of the virtual environment too. And even geographically getting different perspectives, as we can talk to people from all over the world, essentially. So here's another question. And well, first, before I go to the next question, I should say that there's information on a diversity and inclusion webinar that's coming up that you can go ahead and look at the link if anyone's interested in accessing that. So thank you very much for sharing. We've also got here's the question, I'm sorry, is top tips for success for a new DEI group. I know, Guillermo, you've worked with quite a few DEI groups. Do you have some things to share?
Sure. So I had the opportunity to found the ASE Med Section Diversity and Inclusion Group, and also to found Quake, the nonprofit. And I think the common denominator in both instances was find passionate people that care about the cause. It is all about finding people who love this work, because at the very beginning, the first steps are going to be very, very challenging, not to say difficult. Sometimes there's a lot of paperwork involved, or a lot of reaching out. You will get a few no's, a few yes, a few maybes. So it's all about patience and setting up expectations that are relatable to the greater good. I can think of a few examples of successful DI groups. One of my friends back in the Dominican Republic about a week ago told me that she was going to start creating this network for women in engineering in the country. That was Thursday last week. So a week later, she already has 350 members. It's an entire country, and fortunately, she is and she isn't at the head of department of an engineering school, which gives her some exposure. And that's my next advice. Make sure that you get in touch with people with great networks. Having, for example, I'm here today because Dani invited me. So this is an example of how important it is to have a good network and to work with great people. Actually, the person that put the message on about the webinar, Jennifer Pasdon, she initiated the CUNY Diversity Committee, and she surrounded herself with great individuals to work with, to the point that it's very well developed. She's no longer chairing the committee. She passed the hat to someone else, and I think this is the key to have a successful DEI group, being able to recruit people that are going to stay around and are going to continue working on it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Dani, do you have anything to add?
I don't have any personal experience of starting a new DEI group, but it really all comes down to that intentionality of when you're putting stuff together, of just trying to give people a little bit more time. So, for example, maybe you're going to listen to a TED Talk and then discuss it. Just make sure that you send the TED Talk out a little bit before so that people can listen to it on their own, because I know I personally like to watch something and prepare for it a little bit more, rather than there are people that can watch it real time and have that discussion real time. So try to have that intentionality of planning stuff a little bit beforehand.
I'd also like to add something, a success story, if you will. And it really relies on leadership of your company and leadership of whatever organization you're in. In June, our CEO put out a Pride Month bulletin and said, we're thinking of starting this employee resource group, LGBTQ. And he said, who's in, basically. And that was from the very top. And there was an overwhelming response. And it's been so far, it hasn't really it hasn't really started yet, but so far that's the biggest ERG in our company right now. And that's because at the very top, you have this who's in with me, really. And so it's interesting because we've gotten messages ever since the COVID-19 started, messages every week from our CEO. And that was one of them. And just having that leadership is really important. It transcends a lot of involvement.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. You can't replace a good leader, right? I'll move on to my next question. What can engineering leaders do? Again, we're moving on to more leadership, to address systemic inequalities within the workplace and attract a diverse workforce. So, Laura, you've mentioned a few things, but what are some of the other things that your company has done to create a more inclusive work culture? Luis, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think we all have had great points in this conversation already, but I think one of the most important things is having clear goals on what that looks like. Just having a set of numbers in front of you that you're aiming to achieve. And I was actually listening to a couple of TED Talks early this week, just kind of preparing for this discussion, just learning a little bit more. And this was this student, I can't remember the university quite top of my head, but she wanted to create a movement at university. She was a Black woman trying to get more people, more Black students, more Black deans into the university leadership and into basically a higher role in the university. So she basically just confronted the president of the university and said, okay, these are the set of rules or the set of the number of people you should be having at this university. If you don't have that, you are gonna face these sort of consequences, which was you are not really a person that supports diversity and inclusion. So having a set of rules and consequences is going to be really important to achieve those goals. And I think this goes back to, many things we do in our lives, just having a set of rules and a set of goals that we want to achieve. And if we don't get to that goal, there are going to be a certain number of consequences that are really going to be you're going to have certain consequences if you don't get to those goals. The other thing is you need to there's this quote, I can't remember exactly what it says, but people won't care about what you have to say until you care about them. So having that personality that brings inclusivity, especially from leadership, is going to be really important for a company, showing that that person cares about everyone in their companies, and just showing that it's important to have diversity and inclusion is going to be really key for any company.
Yeah, absolutely. Guillermo, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to mention, I like that Luis mentioned the best practices, and I would like to add to that it's important to remember that we have to empower everyone. Once we understand the context, we understand where we are, we have assessed and see what are the goals that we have to meet. We have to make sure that we empower everyone around us, because if we don't do that, then we will not be able to meet those goals that should come in I guess, in a best practices kind of set or a toolkit. And similarly, I think something that was mentioned before, mentorship. So important to make sure that organizations, companies are able to create formal mentorship relationships. If you have a mentor, find another one. Literature says you need 8 to have a healthy balance of mentors. So find one that works with you, one outside, one that is not in your field. And this is going to help you throughout all the challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Mentorship is so important. And, I just want to highlight, I know Luis has been really active within the ASCE mentoring program and has really made a huge impact on a lot of people's lives. And I know, Dani, you've been really active with mentorship within the Philadelphia section. So I just want to hats off to you, because I don't get a chance to recognize you both enough, because I know you guys just really value mentorship and have done a great job. So thank you for all that you do. I'll go ahead and turn to our next question. So we've got someone leaving us that has to go, but they said, have a wonderful day. I thought maybe that was the question. I think we're getting kind of close on time. I think we might have time for 1 or 2 more questions. But I do think that STEM is a really important element of this conversation. So I'm going to skip ahead and make sure we get to that question. So as the pipeline of engineers is highly dependent on pre-college outreach, how can we be more intentional in STEM outreach efforts to attract a more diverse pool of engineers? So Julia, I'll turn to you first to get your thoughts.
Okay. Well, I think it all boils down to, how do we connect with the educators and with the parents of underrepresented, communities? I mean, I think it starts from there. How do you connect with the parents, and how do you connect with the educators? We as engineers, I know that I receive a lot of emails about, this toolkit from ASCE and that toolkit from ASCE, but we need to find a better way of how do we connect, because the educators or the parents, they're the ones who have that direct one-on-one contact with the students. So we have to be able to have better communications with the educators and the students. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, my story and how I even got involved in engineering. I was attending Fort Lauderdale High School, and I wanted to be a lawyer. That's all I wanted to be. However, by the time I was in the 11th grade, my physics teacher, she was an engineer, and she's an African-American woman. She was an engineer, and she decided to take a break from the corporate world. And, it was a pressure situation, and she wanted to have children. And she said, you know what, I'm going to be a physics teacher. She became a physics teacher, and she saw that I was talented in her classroom. And she said, you know what, I don't want to get away from engineering. I still want to do something with engineering, but I want to teach. I don't want to get back into that corporate grind. So she decided to start up an after-school activities, a science club, an engineering club for students. And she got the school involved in it and got her friends from the corporate world involved. And she saw me and she said, Julia, you're pretty good at physics and math. Would you mind taking a part in this after school program? I said, Mrs. Owens, I don't know what engineering is about. She's like, just try it. If you don't like it, it's okay. And she got me hooked. So you see how she's an educator. She's an engineer. This is years ago, but it sometimes it takes one person, but it takes that initiative. And I think it has to be from the educators and from the parents. Like we have to be able to better communicate with them. And they're the ones that are in front of the students to get them engaged in that and being able to get young students to major in engineering. She was the primary reason why I am an engineer today. And I think it starts there. She was an educator and she got me hooked, and she looked like me.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think you're right, Julia. Like, it really just takes one person to make a huge impact on someone's life. Dani, I know you've been really involved with STEM outreach. What are your thoughts?
First, I want to say thank you, Julia, for sharing that, because yes, it does come down to a lot of those stories that I've never heard of the word engineering until this person was said, hey, you're good at physics, math, or science, or you enjoy these topics. Have you thought about this? So it's really great to have those educators or parents that are around there having those conversations with their current students. So back to the question, it really, as alluded in the question, it really comes down to that intentionality. So this past year, I served as K through 12 outreach co-chair, and when we started our term with my co-chair and I sat down, and it was really into that intentionality of, okay, where are we going to have these events? What schools are we going to reach out to? And it's about looking into, are we only going to city schools? No, you have to have that diversity of going to city schools, going to schools in the suburbs, talking to elementary kids, talking to high school kids, going to private schools, public schools, all of that, to have that intentionality and see that you're not just going to one of those for all of your events throughout the year. An additional way that we've done this is we partnered with local outreach programs in the area, like Stepping Stone Scholars or Girls Inc. So when we're partnering with that organization, we're not going to a specific school. So we're getting a diversity and an extent of the kids that we are talking to. Intentionality also goes into planning for that day of can you bring a diverse group of volunteers with you? And not just identities. I'm also talking about the diversity of the civil engineering discipline, which I think we covered in last Thursday at 3. I can talk all I want about how much I love structural engineering, but having someone like Laurie come and talk about why she chose ITS in civil engineering can go a long way, and that passion can go through, and it gives those kids why you went into civil engineering, but that step further of why you picked that discipline. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Absolutely. So I think we have time for one more question that I'll go ahead and turn to. So how can engineers plan and design for underprivileged communities during COVID-19? What is the importance of community planning when thinking about diversity and inclusion, and what are some of our ethical obligations? So Luis, what are some of your thoughts on this? I know you've done a lot of volunteer work overseas as well, so.
Yeah, and again, this goes back to listening and understanding their community needs. They've been, I mean, the most successful Engineers Without Borders teams that I know have gone to these communities with the real intention of listening and providing for their needs, not what they wanted to do over there. I think that's going to be the main takeaway from there is you need to understand what they need and how how you can provide for them. Specifically in the Engineers Without Borders, that we do around 3 to 4 trips before we actually start designing or implementing anything in foreign countries. So we're really putting their needs ahead of our needs and just understanding exactly what they need and listening to them and just being part of the communities and like show interest and all the things we have been talking about here are gonna go a long ways when working with these small communities, just showing them that you really care and that you understand their point of view, and just be more intentional of that conversation when you have it with them.
Absolutely. Guillermo, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I wanted to add, I think what Luis said is very powerful, but also during COVID-19, these are unique times. So we have to really try to think outside of the box, because the in-person experience is sometimes no longer affordable. There are tremendous efforts on outreach. I have seen a few on LGBTQ plus related issues for engineering and STEM in general. There is an initiative called Queer Scientist, where it's an amazing collection of people with where essentially people participate in this online platform by sending information about who they are, how to identify, what are their pronouns, and what is their job. And then this gives an opportunity for people to just have exposure online to see, oh, this person identifies similar to how I identify. I've never met someone that is an engineer or a scientist that also is identifies as they, them, just to say something. Similarly, Quake has something called the Be Queer project, where we try to show LGBTQIA plus people in engineering. And there's so many other possibilities. I know there's a hashtag, I look like an engineer, that it's very powerful because it's a good way. I actually, this is something I like to do myself. I like to look for that hashtag and see the diversity of people that are engineers, because we forget, we only think like me as a Latino man, I'm like, okay, this is what I want to look for. No, but there's more. There's other groups that are less privileged. So it's so important to think about socioeconomic status, about disability, about so many things that are important. So I think this is a good way that we can try to all wade in to cater to other privileged groups.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I don't know if anyone has read Stephanie Slocum's book, She Engineers, but she talks a lot about wanting to look like an engineer and that imposter syndrome. And so that is so important to understand, again, to be yourself and to see other people that look like you that are doing what you do is so important. We're running short on time, so I'll ask everyone if we could take about 30 seconds or so to wrap up some of your thoughts. Julia, I'll go ahead and start with you. Can you share your closing remarks?
My closing remarks are, and a lot of people, the panelists, they've already hit on this. It changes from the top down. Within an organization, we're talking about organization, how we can get them to be more diverse, to be to have that diversity and inclusion. But it starts from the top, and once it starts there, I know it will trickle down. But if you can't get the heads of the organization to notice that there needs to be change or to make that investment, it's going to be very difficult for it to happen within that particular organization. And if it's something that you're looking for and you're not getting it with that particular organization, it's okay to go somewhere else, because you have to think about you as the individual. What do you need for your career growth, for your personal growth? What do you need for your professional growth? What do you need?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different elements. Luis, I'll go ahead and let you share your closing remarks.
Yeah, reiterating what we all have said, is just learning to see different perspectives in our daily lives, just understanding that we're global citizens and just trying to learn and listen and be charismatic with anyone we cross paths with. And I think I try to do that a lot. I don't think there's enough people smiling on the streets to other people, just giving happiness overall to the people that we encounter in our daily lives. And that's going to be really important for us to start creating change and just being more charismatic with everyone and understanding their point of view. Even for me, I'm Hispanic and I came to the US as a minority, and just seeing and understanding where some of the people, especially in South Dakota, which is a really small state, just understand their perspective when they were basically saying things about Colombia that were not really true right now, just understanding where they're coming from. They don't really hear much about Colombia in South Dakota. So just educating them and just talking about the great things that Colombia has to offer and the people in Colombia have to offer, I think that's going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Dani, what are your thoughts?
I'll keep it very brief because we are in interest of time. But if you do take one thing away from this discussion, it is that D&I or DEI involves being intentional. And last thing is, as we are still in the middle of a pandemic, I just want to remind everyone to continue to practice compassion towards each other. That's all.
Yep, that's great advice. Guillermo? There you go.
Last minute, I had to do it. So I think it'll summarize this to the words we have heard the most: listening, learning, mentorship, finding support groups. And I think someone in the comments said something very interesting. Gia said, you cannot be what you cannot see. So you really have to cater yourself as the amazing person you are, because your talents and what people might think are your weaknesses are your strengths. So make sure that you take advantage of this opportunity that has been given to you so you can do the best out of a job that is meant to serve the people, civil engineering.
Absolutely. Laurie, can you go ahead and close us out?
Sure. Close us out. Ask
Close us out.
questions, listen more. And actually, Gia is my mentee. So I'm happy that she was here listening, and she added that great point of you can't be what you can't see. Representation is so important. I want to give a shout out to her. Glad she was able to watch this and participate. So thank you for this opportunity, and to ASCE for bringing us together.
Absolutely. Thank you all. This has been a fabulous panel. I have greatly enjoyed hearing your perspectives. If anyone wants to carry on this conversation, just a reminder, ASC members can carry it on online on ASCE Collaborate. So again, hopefully we continue to engage and talk about this. It's so important. Anyways, thank you all again. I greatly appreciate your time.